Patriarchy is not just a social system, it's a mindset, a deeply embedded belief structure that we've inherited over generations. It doesn't just live in laws or institutions, it lives in us. It whispers in the choices we make, the way we see ourselves, and the way we judge others. And one of the most dangerous things about it is how invisible it can be. You might think, I don't believe in these things, but the truth is, we've all absorbed it, often without realizing. Here's the question we need to ask ourselves: what does it mean to truly unlearn something? Not just intellectually, but emotionally, instinctively, what does it mean to change the way you react, the way you think, the way you feel? Because that's what breaking free from patriarchy requires. It's not just about knowing better, it's about being different. And that's hard, because the beliefs we're trying to unlearn are the same ones that have shaped us from the beginning. Let's talk about the cost of patriarchy, not just to women, but to everyone. For men, the pressure to conform to this narrow definition of masculinity can be suffocating. It tells you that your worth is tied to your success, your strength, your ability to dominate. It tells you that vulnerability is weakness, that emotions are something to suppress, that failure is unacceptable. And so you build walls, you become hard, distant, and disconnected, not just from others, but from yourself. What does that cost you? Your relationships, your mental health, your sense of purpose. How many men are walking around carrying this invisible weight, not even realizing where it comes from? For women, the cost is just as heavy, but it looks different. Patriarchy tells you that your worth is tied to your appearance, your ability to nurture, your willingness to serve. It tells you that your place is behind, below, or beside, but never in front. It tells you that you have to work twice as hard to be seen, but even then, you'll never be enough. And so you shrink, you make yourself smaller, quieter, more pleasing. You learn to doubt yourself, to second-guess your voice, to seek validation from a system that was never designed to value you. What does that cost you? Your confidence, your dreams, your sense of self? How many women are living lives that feel too small because the world told them they had to?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But it's not just men and women. Patriarchy harms everyone who doesn't fit into its rigid categories: queer people, trans people, non-binary people. It tells you that your very existence is wrong, that you're a threat to the natural order, that you need to be erased. It demands that you conform or disappear. And the cost of that, it's immeasurable. It's lives lost to violence, to rejection, to despair. Its potential snuffed out before it ever had a chance to shine. So here's the deeper question: if patriarchy costs us so much, why do we hold on to it? Why do we keep passing it down generation after generation? The answer, I think, lies in fear. Patriarchy thrives on fear: fear of losing power, fear of being vulnerable, fear of change. It convinces us that the way things are is the way they have to be, that any deviation from the norm will lead to chaos. It uses fear to keep us in line, to keep us from imagining something better. But here's the thing: fear is a liar. The world doesn't fall apart when we challenge patriarchy, it gets better. When men are allowed to be vulnerable, they become more whole. When women are allowed to take up space, they become more powerful. When queer and trans people are allowed to exist without fear, they become more free. And when all of us are allowed to live without the confines of these rigid roles, we become more human. The truth is, patriarchy is not inevitable. It's not natural. It's a choice we've been making for centuries, but a choice nonetheless. And because it's a choice, it's something we can unmake. But that requires us to do the hard work of unlearning, of questioning, of letting go. It requires us to be brave enough to imagine a different way of being, and then to build it piece by piece. So let me ask you, what would your life look like without patriarchy? What would your relationships feel like if they weren't shaped by power and control? What would your sense of self be if it wasn't tied to these narrow definitions of masculinity or femininity? What kind of world could we create if we stopped trying to fit into these boxes and started living as our full, authentic selves? This isn't just about tearing something down, it's about building something new. And that's where philosophy has often failed us. Philosophy loves to analyze and critique, but it's not always good at imagining. It's not always good at creating. Feminism, at its best, isn't just about pointing out what's wrong. It's about dreaming of what could be. It's about asking, what does true equality look like? What does true freedom feel like? What does it mean to live in a world where everyone is valued, where everyone is seen, where everyone has a voice? And that's where you come in. Because this isn't just a theoretical question, it's a practical one. It's about the choices you make every day. How do you show up in your relationships, in your community, in your workplace? How do you challenge the beliefs that have been handed to you, even when it's uncomfortable? How do you use whatever power you have, big or small, to create change? The future of feminism isn't something that happens out there, it's something that happens here, in each of us. It's in the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat each other, the way we imagine what's possible. And it's not just about dismantling patriarchy, it's about building a world where everyone can thrive, where everyone can be free. So I'll leave you with this: what are you willing to let go of to create that world? What are you willing to unlearn, to question, to change? Because that's where it starts, with you, with me, with all of us choosing to live differently, to love differently, to be different. And if we can do that, if we can even begin to do that, then maybe, just maybe, we can create something truly extraordinary. Unlearning something as deeply ingrained as patriarchy isn't easy. It's not like flipping a switch or reading a book and suddenly being free from it. This isn't just an idea, it's a system that has shaped our thoughts, our behaviors, and even the way we see ourselves. But the good news is, because patriarchy is learned, it can also be unlearned. And that's where real power lies, in the recognition that we don't have to live this way. We don't have to carry these beliefs forward. The question is, how do we begin? How do we break the cycles that hold us back and reclaim the parts of ourselves that patriarchy has silenced or distorted? Let's start with awareness. You can't change something you don't even realize is there. Patriarchy isn't always loud and obvious. It's not just the blatant sexism or toxic masculinity you see in headlines. It's the quiet, insidious beliefs that whisper in the back of your mind. It's the way you judge yourself or others, the way you react to certain situations, the way you define success, love, or worth. It's in the expectations you've absorbed without even realizing it. So the first step is to start noticing. What stories have you been told about what it means to be a man, a woman, or anything in between? What rules have you internalized about how you should act, feel, or look? And how are those stories and rules still shaping you today? This kind of awareness requires honesty. It's not about blaming yourself, it's about being willing to see the ways patriarchy has lived inside you. Maybe it's the way you've suppressed your emotions because you were taught that vulnerability is a weakness. Maybe it's the way you've judged someone for not fitting into traditional gender roles. Maybe it's the way you've measured your worth by your achievements or your appearance. None of this makes you a bad person, it just makes you human. But noticing these patterns is the first step toward breaking them. Once you start to notice, the next step is to question. Patriarchy thrives on unchallenged beliefs. It tells you, this is just the way things are, but is it? Who decided that men can't cry or that women should be quiet? Who decided that power looks like domination or that love looks like sacrifice? And more importantly, who benefits from these beliefs? Questioning isn't just about rejecting old ideas, it's about making space for new ones. It's about imagining what else could be true and what else could be possible. For example, think about the way patriarchy defines strength. It tells us that strength is about control over others, over emotions, over circumstances. But what if real strength is something else entirely? What if it's about resilience, compassion, or the ability to be vulnerable? What if strength isn't about standing alone, but about building connections? By questioning these definitions, you start to see that the rules you've been following aren't as fixed or inevitable as they seem. They're just ideas. And ideas can change. But awareness and questioning are only the beginning. The real work is in the choices you make every day. It's in the way you show up in your relationships, your work, and your community. Breaking the cycle of patriarchy means choosing differently, even when it's uncomfortable or unfamiliar. It means choosing to express your emotions, even when you've been taught to hide them. It means choosing to listen, even when your instinct is to speak. It means choosing to support others, even when you feel like you're the one who needs support. These choices might feel small, but they add up. They create new patterns, new habits, and ultimately, a new way of being. One of the most powerful ways to break the cycle is to reconnect with the parts of yourself that patriarchy taught you to suppress. For men, this might mean reconnecting with vulnerability, creativity, or tenderness. It might mean exploring what it feels like to let go of the need to prove yourself or to always be in control. For women, this might mean reconnecting with confidence, assertiveness, or ambition. It might mean exploring what it feels like to take up space, to set boundaries, or to prioritize your own needs. For queer and non-binary people, it might mean reconnecting with your authentic self, free from the rigid expectations of gender roles. Whatever it looks like for you, this process isn't about becoming someone new, it's about reclaiming who you've always been. Healing from patriarchy also means healing your relationships. Patriarchy teaches us to see relationships as power struggles: who's in control, who's giving, who's taking. But relationships built on power aren't real relationships, they're transactions. Breaking the cycle means choosing relationships based on mutual respect, trust, and care. It means being willing to be vulnerable, to ask for what you need, and to give without expecting something in return. It means recognizing that real love isn't about domination or sacrifice, it's about partnership. And while you're healing your relationships with others, don't forget to heal your relationship with yourself. Patriarchy teaches us to be at war with ourselves, to judge, criticize, and deny the parts of us that don't fit its narrow definitions. It tells us that we're never enough, or that we're too much. Breaking the cycle means learning to see yourself not as something to be fixed, but as someone to be loved. It means giving yourself permission to be messy, complicated, and imperfect. Because the truth is, there's nothing wrong with you. The problem isn't who you are, it's the system that told you who you were supposed to be. But breaking the cycle isn't just personal, it's also collective. Patriarchy isn't just an individual mindset, it's a social system. And while unlearning it on a personal level is important, we also have to challenge it on a systemic level. That means speaking up when you see injustice, supporting policies that promote equality, and creating spaces where people of all genders can thrive. It means being willing to disrupt the status quo, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the truth is, change doesn't happen on its own, it happens when we choose to make it happen. This is where the work gets hard. Because challenging patriarchy means challenging power, and power doesn't like to be challenged. You're going to face resistance both from others and from within yourself. There will be moments when it feels easier to stay silent, to go along with the way things are, to avoid the discomfort of change. But those are the moments that matter most. Those are the moments when you have the chance to break the cycle, to do something different, to create something better. So where do you start? You start where you are. You start by noticing the beliefs you've internalized, by questioning the rules you've been following, and by making choices that align with your values rather than with fear. You start by showing up in your relationships with honesty and vulnerability. You start by using whatever power you have to create spaces where others can do the same. And you keep going even when it's hard, even when it feels like you're not making a difference. Because every small act of courage adds up. Every time you choose to live differently, you're breaking the cycle not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. Patriarchy didn't happen overnight, and it won't disappear overnight either. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Every choice you make, every belief you question, every relationship you heal, it all matters. It all adds up. And together we can create a world where no one has to live in a box, where no one has to prove their worth, where everyone is free to be their full, authentic selves. So let me ask you this: what's one belief about yourself or others that you're ready to let go of? What's one small step you can take today to live more authentically, more freely, and more fully? Because that's where it starts, not with grand gestures or perfect solutions, but with small, intentional choices. And those choices, when made over and over again, have the power to change everything. Patriarchy isn't just a massive system, it's a cycle that's reinforced through repetition. It's sustained because we keep living it, often without realizing we're doing so. When you think about it, every time we uphold these unspoken rules, we're participating in its survival. And the most difficult part? It's not always the obvious actions that keep it alive. It's the small, almost invisible moments, the things we don't question, the times we stay silent, the choices that feel normal but are anything but natural. Let's talk about these moments. Think about when a boy is told not to cry because boys don't do that. What's really happening there? On the surface, it might seem like harmless advice, maybe even tough love. But underneath, it's something far more damaging. It's a message that emotions are a weakness, that vulnerability is shameful, that to be a man is to suppress your humanity. And what happens to that boy as he grows up? He learns to shut down parts of himself. He learns that anger is acceptable, but sadness isn't. He learns to wear a mask of strength, even when he's breaking inside, and the cycle continues. Now think about the messages girls receive. Be nice, don't be too loud, smile more again. These might sound harmless, but they carry a deeper message. Your value lies in how others perceive you. Don't be too opinionated, or you'll be seen as difficult. Don't take up too much space, or you'll make others uncomfortable. Learn to prioritize everyone else's comfort over your own. And as she grows up, this girl learns to shrink herself, to silence herself, to tie her worth to how much she can please others. And the cycle continues. But here's the thing: these moments don't just affect individuals. They ripple outwards. The boy who learns to suppress his emotions grows into a man who struggles to connect with others, who might lash out when he feels vulnerable because he's never been taught how to handle those feelings. The girl who learns to shrink herself grows into a woman who doubts her abilities, who hesitates to speak up even when she knows she's right. These aren't isolated experiences, they're patterns. And these patterns shape our relationships, our workplaces, our communities, and eventually our entire culture. Breaking these patterns means being willing to see them for what they are. It means looking at the moments where you've internalized these rules and asking yourself why. Why do I feel like I have to act this way? Who benefits from me staying silent, from me pretending, from me conforming? And once you see the patterns, you have a choice. You can decide whether or not to keep repeating them. This isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it's also one of the most powerful. Let's get practical. If you want to start breaking these cycles, the first thing you need to do is pay attention to your reactions. When someone cries in front of you, how do you feel? Do you instinctively want to comfort them, or do you feel uncomfortable and wish they'd stop? When you see someone challenge authority, do you admire their courage, or do you feel like they should stay in their place? These reactions might feel automatic, but they're not, they're learned. And once you notice them, you can start to unlearn them. Next, start questioning the stories you've absorbed. For example, why do we associate leadership with dominance? Why do we equate strength with silence? Why do we praise sacrifice in women but ambition in men? These stories aren't natural, they're narratives that have been passed down because they serve a purpose. They maintain a system where certain people have power and others don't. But those stories have no real authority, they only have the power we give them. And when you start to question them, you take that power back. Another important step is to challenge the way you communicate. Patriarchy has taught us to speak in ways that reinforce power dynamics. For men, this might mean always trying to assert dominance, interrupting others, or avoiding vulnerability in conversations. For women, it might mean softening your words, apologizing too much, or hesitating to speak at all. Changing the way you communicate means being intentional. It means speaking with honesty and courage, but also with respect and humility. It means listening just as much as you speak and being willing to admit when you're wrong. But unlearning patriarchy isn't just about yourself, it's also about how you show up for others. One of the most powerful ways to break this cycle is to be an ally. This means using your privilege, whatever it is, to support those who are most affected by these systems. It means amplifying voices that have been silenced, challenging behaviors that reinforce oppression, and standing up even when it's uncomfortable. And it's not about being perfect, it's about being willing to learn, to grow, and to keep trying. This brings us to one of the hardest parts of breaking the cycle: accountability. Unlearning patriarchy isn't a straight line, it's messy, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to slip back into old patterns, say the wrong thing, or act in ways that reinforce the very systems you're trying to dismantle. But accountability isn't about beating yourself up, it's about being honest with yourself and others. It's about acknowledging your mistakes, apologizing when necessary, and committing to doing better. This is where real growth happens, not in the absence of mistakes, but in how you respond to them. And while accountability is important, so is forgiveness. Patriarchy has harmed all of us, and we've all participated in it in some way. Holding on to guilt or shame won't help anyone. What matters is what you do next. Are you willing to take responsibility for your role in the system? Are you willing to do the work of unlearning and rebuilding? Are you willing to forgive yourself and others so that you can move forward? One of the most beautiful things about breaking the cycle is that it doesn't just free you, it frees everyone around you. When you choose to live differently, you give others permission to do the same. When you reject the rules of patriarchy, you create space for new possibilities. When you heal your own wounds, you make it easier for others to heal theirs. This is how change happens, not through grand gestures, but through the small, everyday choices we make to live in alignment with our values. So let's end with this: what does freedom look like to you? Not the kind of freedom that patriarchy promises, the freedom to dominate, to control, to compete, but real freedom. The freedom to be fully yourself, to love without fear, to live without shame. The freedom to connect with others as equals, to build relationships based on trust and care, to create a world where everyone can thrive. That kind of freedom doesn't come from following the rules, it comes from breaking them. It comes from choosing to live in a way that's true to who you are. not who the system says you're supposed to be. And the best part, this isn't something you have to do alone. Every time you choose freedom, you inspire others to do the same. Every time you break the cycle, you create a ripple effect that reaches farther than you'll ever know. This is the power of unlearning patriarchy. It's not just about changing yourself. It's about changing the world. And the world needs that change now more than ever.